It's great to be together. This is VBS Lunch and Learn, and I'm Rabbi Feinstein, and I'm really glad everybody's here. So we are looking at the books at the end of the Hebrew Bible, beginning with, we started some months ago with the prophets, and now we're working through the Ketuvim, the writings. And the book that we looked at last time was the book of Kohelet, a unique and powerful book in the Bible because it's one of the very few books, not just in the Bible, but frankly, in all of human literature, that is willing to simply take on the whole question of the whole question of the meaning of life. What after all is the meaning of life? And you know, it's a question that in American culture you can't ask with a straight face. It becomes a sort of joke. It's like the question that can never be answered. But it has to be asked at some point, because at some point we stop the routines and the tasks and the works of life, and we ask ourselves, like, what does all this mean? What am I doing this for? What is the source of my resilience? Where do I get a sense of purpose? What is the source of meaningfulness in the course of my life? And these are very serious questions. And unfortunately, American culture isn't set up to even address those questions because it doesn't sort of fit into the routine of American life. But here you have a book of the Bible, and that's the express purpose of the book, to ask that question. So as we saw before, the book of Kohelet, written sometime during the 3rd century BCE, 200s, it's a book that asks the question, is there anything that I can invest myself in that will give me some sort of immortality, some sort of taste of eternity? Is there anything that I can invest myself in that transcends death, that transcends time? That's a very interesting question. You know, what can I put myself in? And that's what Kohelet is looking for when he says he's looking for the purpose of it all, the meaning of it all, something that'll get him past time. And he does these 4 experiments. He looks at the 4 things that people spend most of their lives. Just got a text from my secretary saying we're not live. Yes, I know. Yes, I know. I can't get it. Yes, I know. Live stream isn't working. Have them join the Zoom. There. So the Kohelet goes looking for that which fulfills, and he has a sort of mathematical algorithm that he puts up. You know, what is the value of X such that X, when you take away death, equals something positive? And he comes at this almost like an accountant looking at credits and debits, right? If I take away time, if I take away faded memories, if I take away death, what's left to me? What gives me some sense of immortality? He looks at 4 things. The acquisition of a pleasure is number 1. Wealth is number 2. Wisdom is number 3. And righteousness or devotion is number 4. And in looking at these 4 things, he's looking for that which fulfills that deep human need, that deep sense of emptiness when we stare into the night sky and see the infinity of all the stars and wonder, how small are we? Or when you go to the funeral of someone who you love and you look into the open grave and you wonder, how brief is human life? That's the great question that he's asking. Must be something. There must be something that I can invest myself in that will get me past time, that will last, that will be permanent. Because the impermanence, the fleeting nature, the transient nature of human life is driving him crazy. Leaves him with a deep sense of emptiness inside, a deep sense of the hollowness of human life and the hollowness of all of our pursuits. And I suggested to you a couple of times ago that really what's happening here is the product of a particular social circumstance. Human beings in that century, in the 3rd century BCE, is when Alexander the Great comes and conquers the whole Mediterranean. And you have a move from people leaving their villages and the culture and the life of their villages into the big city and joining the great cosmopolitan culture of Hellenistic civilization. Now, in the village, everybody knows each other. In the village, everybody knows each other's genealogy. I knew your parents, I knew your grandparents. The village is a bounded social space, a bounded social community in which memory is kept alive, passed from generation to generation. So if you're the one who built the church or the synagogue, if you're the one who built the bridge, if you were whatever you did, you put out the fire when it happened that time. The stories of the village, the legacy of the village is kept alive in the culture of the village, and it's memorialized in various monuments in the village. But when I moved to the city, nobody knows me. Nobody knows where I came from. Nobody knows who my parents are. Nobody knows what I've accomplished. Nobody knows, and frankly, nobody cares. You have this phenomenon of urban anonymity. Urban anonymity. And one of the products of urban anonymity is this terrible, empty sense that no matter what I do, I'll never be known. I'll never be known. I mean, think for a moment about all the things that people do in order to get their name out there, because they want to be known. They want to be recognized. They want to be celebrated in some way, right? You have these television programs, American Idol, which I think is such a great name, by the way. American Idol, right? And people get up and sing, I want to be famous, because if I'm famous, I'm somebody. Right, you really, I mean, are you really? That's what, and then there's the crazier ones where, them people have talent, they can juggle, they can eat fire, they, God knows, do magic tricks. I want to be somebody. This deep, deep need to be known so that I can be somebody. That is the drive that Kohelet has captured in his book. And after his 4 experiments, he comes to a very sad conclusion. He says, there is nothing. He says, it doesn't matter how much happiness you have. Happiness is wonderful. It's so much better than pain, but it's not going to get you past death. It's a transient experience. And wealth is wonderful. Much better to be rich than to be poor. True, by the way, but it's not going to get you past death, because when a person dies, their wealth goes to somebody else. And wisdom is wonderful. It's better to have wisdom than be ignorant. You can make better decisions, but wise people die just like foolish people. And then the other problem, of course, is with being wise is that the more you know, the more problems you got, right? I always say my dog is a very happy dog because he doesn't watch CNN, right? He doesn't understand what happened on January 6th, or he doesn't understand what happens in Ethiopia or Yemen. He doesn't understand what's happening with China or global warming. He's just happy if he gets his stomach scratched and his dinner every night. The smarter you are, the more tsuras you got. And then finally, he says, even devotion, even righteousness, which is what the whole Torah is about. He says, okay, but listen, righteous people and not such righteous people, they all meet the same fate. And then those who participate in the life of religion and those who don't, nothing really different about the way they live. And I'm not even sure, he says, that religious people are much happier than non-religious people. They seem to be hung up about an awful lot more. And so finally, what happens is he says, there's no way. There's no way that we know that you can empirically prove that a certain way of life is going to solve the problem of human impermanence. And so what's his solution in the end? Here's his solution. Remember, his solution was there's a season set for everything and a time for every purpose under heaven. It sounds familiar. It was a famous song. A time to be born and a time to die, a time for planting and uprooting, for slaying and healing and tearing down and building up. So basically what he's saying is you can't find anything that's going to get you past the problem of impermanence. All that you can do, all that you can hope to do, all that you can do is to enjoy the rhythms of life, right? And he says, here's his prose version of the same thing. It's pretty typical in this book, where he'll give you a poetry and then a prose saying the same thing. Go eat your bread in gladness and drink your wine in joy, for your action was long ago proved by God. Let your clothes be freshly washed and your head never lack ointment. Enjoy happiness with a woman you love all the fleeting days of your life that you've been granted, for that alone is what you get out of life, out of all the means you acquire under the sun. And then he gives one little piece of advice, which I do think is kind of wonderful. Whatever it is in your power to do, do with all your might. For there's no action, no reasoning, no learning, no wisdom in Sheol. Sheol is death, where you're going. So the one piece of wisdom he does says is, look, if you're going to go eat that piece of chocolate cake, for God's sakes, eat a big piece of chocolate cake and enjoy it, right? Not like you Jews. I know you Jews because I'm one of them. And I know you eat a piece of chocolate cake and then you feel guilty for 3 days, right? He says, screw that. Eat the chocolate cake for God's sakes and enjoy it. And enjoy the things, because this is life. This isn't the rehearsal for something, and there's nothing coming after this. So enjoy all of the pleasures and joys and celebrations of life as they come your way, because that is what life is about. That is what life is about. Now, let's stop for a second. Everybody take a breath, and let me ask you a bunch of questions. First of all, Kohelet is looking for an answer to impermanence, and that is what he defines as the meaning of existence. Is that the right question to ask? That's question number one. Question number two, he says there is no answer to the problem of impermanence. Is that true? Number three, because there's no answer, there's nothing that I can do that gives me a sense of my permanence, of eternity. Therefore, the answer is to live all of the pleasures, all of the joys, including all of the sadness and all of the difficulties of life. Live the moments of life as they come to you, enjoy them, embrace them, hold them, cry when they're sad, laugh when they're happy, but hold them. There is the only meaning of life, he says, is in the rhythm of the experiences of life itself. There is no message to life beyond it. That's his conclusion. And the question I want to ask you is he right? Is he right? That's the next question. No, question number four. This is on the test, so make sure you write these down. Question number four is, the Bible seems to have a different opinion. There are lots of ways and places in the Bible where you get a sense of, if you do this, you will have something bigger. You will attach yourself to something bigger. Who let this book into the Bible? How did this book get incorporated into the scripture? Because it's an awfully pessimistic, shall we say, even cynical book, for a book of faith that is, after all, the Bible. So who let this in? How did this get here? Why is it here? And then finally, what other answers can we give to this problem? And what other answers did the Jewish tradition give to this problem? So let's start at the beginning, okay? Yes, Bert, you just have to, everybody has to unmute when you talk. So please unmute, otherwise we can't hear you. Bert, you're up. Yeah, unmute, that's it.
No, if you don't hear me, maybe it's better.
No, we want to hear.
Okay, I've still hung up on something from a couple of weeks ago in terms of this permanence word, or I think at that time you also mentioned the word legacy. My example today is we're doing Kohelet. This is not 200 BCE. There is a permanence, there's a legacy, there's something left behind that has lasted at least 200, 2,400 years. I did the same argument with the Rambam. There are things that were done in time by people, by cultures, that are here today. You could argue if those things are good or bad, but they're here. There's a kind of legacy, a permanence, something we say, oh, gosh, I'm really glad Einstein did this, because if not, I wouldn't have that. So maybe that's part of an answer. It is for me, at least. It may not be for anybody else. There's a again, I keep using the word legacy because I'm struggling to find the right noun. And again, Kohelet's here. The Bible's here. They were written thousands of years ago.
Right.
If there was no lasting, how come they're here?
So we pointed this out at the very end. It's a very well put argument. Thank you so much. One of the ironies of the book is a guy who says there's nothing new under the sun. Well, if there's nothing new under the sun, why do you write a book? I mean, if you really believe that the patterns of life are set and can never be changed, you write a book because you think you can change something, because you think that the wisdom and the that somehow the wisdom of life can change the way that somebody else lives their life, and they can find a more satisfying life. Now, maybe what he's trying to say is that your quest for eternity is futile. But here, the great irony, as Bert points out, is that a guy who said there's nothing that will ever change, and there's nothing we can do to touch the face of eternity, we're still reading his book. We're still reading the book. And so the question really is there? So one of the ways I pointed this out last time, and excuse me for going back over this, I think it's kind of interesting, is that if you look at Kohelet's answers, his experiments, pleasure, wealth, wisdom, righteousness, one of the things you notice is there's no social context, meaning he's all by himself. It's all about what I get out of it. But all of us, we live for other people. Martin Buber, the great Jewish philosopher of the last century, said, it's the I-thou relationship that gives me a sense of my own significance. Kohelet doesn't have any I-thou relationships. All of his relationships we could characterize as I-it. He uses people. And in using people, yeah, no kidding, you don't find much meaning in that. But if you were to take the I-thou that Buber described and go back and replay his 4 experiments, let's go through one at a time. Pleasure, listen, it's wonderful to have pleasure, but it's a whole different experience when you enjoy dinner with somebody you love. I mean, it's a whole different experience when you take a grandchild to Disneyland than if you go yourself. Sharing pleasure is a different experience than having pleasure. Number 2, wealth. If you say, I spent the money on myself, what's this beautiful line in Kohelet? I denied my eyes nothing they asked for. It's the American consumer dream, right? And this time when everyone's out Christmas shopping and you all are out doing your Hanukkah shopping, right? Because you only have a week left before Hanukkah. Yeah, and if it's only for yourself, it's going to give you a certain amount of satisfaction. But who spends their wealth only on themselves? It's what wealth can do for the world. It's what wealth can do if you guide it with wisdom. Wealth can make a big difference in the lives of human beings. And the people we remember are often the people who accomplish great things, right? Carnegie Hall is a beautiful place in New York, and it was built by a guy who was awfully rich, and his name was Carnegie, right? You can do some great things with wealth. Wisdom, we talked about, if you share wisdom, if you teach, if that's how wisdom becomes Torah, teaching, it can create a legacy. And righteousness, this is one of the most radical ones, because he says, I saw wickedness next to righteousness. I saw injustice next to justice. And I concluded there's nothing I could do. Well, what do you mean there's nothing you can do? He isn't claimed by the world that he lives in. The world doesn't grab him, right? For all of us who walk past a homeless guy on the street and feel like I give the guy $1, because there's something about his condition that claims me, that grabs at my heartstrings, that makes me feel something, that I want to, that's what we're taught to do when we see the world. But he isn't taught that way. He doesn't work that way. So the question here, and Bert raises this nicely, is the way that most of us find meaning in life is with the people we're with. Kohelet has no people around him. And that's why he feels so empty. And that's what the Torah teaches when it says, Lo tov heyod adam levado. It isn't right for a person to be left alone. That's one way to look at it. Stanley.
Well, I think that's absolutely right.
Thank you.
But it's impossible to know what life was like in the 2nd or 3rd century, 2,300 years ago or whatever. We know there were families. We know that Kohelet wrote something that now we call a book. We don't know what the book was like at the time it was written or who it went to. But we live in a world where there's copyrights and there's people's names on stadiums and, like you said. So we live in a different world and we know all these things, and it's a wide world. His was a narrow world. So I think that's a big part of the problem, that we can look at things from a much different perspective than the author of Kohelet could ever have done in his lifetime.
Well, I'm going to argue that just a little bit, my dear friend, because first of all, Yeah, it's true. We do live in a world in so many different ways, different than his, right? He lived in a world where if you broke your arm or cut your finger, it could kill you. You and I live in a world where people go into the hospital with some of the most horrible things and they come out living long, long lives. And many of us testify to that. But beyond that, the social relations, the search for meaning, a lot of that's the same. I don't know if it's that much different. Yeah, they died younger than us, but they died and we do too. And
Yeah.
if you give a person another 30 years of life, but they don't have a sense of purpose, I'm not sure you've accomplished very much. It's always an interesting thing to me that people have all this more time. God, life is the culture, science, medicine has given us more time, but we really don't have any sense of what to do with it. And so that
I
part, I
agree.
don't know if that's so different. I really don't know if that's so different. Douglas, you're up next, please.
I think everybody feels like Kohelet at some point in their lives and
Mhm.
asks those questions of themselves.
I believe you're right.
Mortality is a given, and you are going to die alone. So that you have these feelings, but and so the question of why this is in this book is name a human being that hasn't at least experienced those feelings.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that isn't that if it's going to raise those questions, and we're giving good answers as to why what he's missing, but sure as hell, tell me a person who's not experienced what he's not
So
felt.
that's my answer to how this got into the Bible. You see, the question, how did this get into the Bible, assumes that there's such a thing as the Bible, which is a coherent book with one point of view. And if you have a book like this one, which contradicts that point of view, it doesn't belong in the Bible. But if you imagine that what we call the Bible is not a book with one point of view, but rather it's a book whose purpose is to reflect upon all of the different moods and attitudes and elements of being a human being. So there are moments, and Douglas is right, there are moments in every one of our lives when we look at the world and we go, oh, it is so meaningless. Where is the meaning? Where is the purpose? Where is something that lasts beyond the evanescence, the transient, the temporary? Give me something I can hold on. That's exactly Kohelet. And by the way, the next book we're going to read, this is a preview of coming attractions, ladies and gentlemen, is the Song of Songs. And in the Talmud, there were two books of the Bible that the rabbis questioned and asked Beferish. They asked explicitly, who let this into the Bible? Kohelet and the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim. Kohelet, they asked, because it's such a cynical book. And Shir HaShirim, you ready for this? Because it's a sensual book of love poetry. Hell, if I had that in Hebrew school, I would have stayed in Hebrew school, right? But the same question can be asked. It's a completely non-religious book. God doesn't appear in the book at all. Song of Songs. We'll see this next time. It's a book where a boy and a girl are longing for each other. And it looks like at certain points that they actually find each other and consummate their relationship. And so you say, like, who let this into the Bible? Well, the answer is there are moments in life when I am cynical and sad. There are moments of life when I see the world as just purposeless. That's Job. That's the book of Job. There are moments of life when I want to celebrate the goodness of life. That's the book of Psalms. And there are moments in life when we fall in love. And, it would be a very empty life if you didn't have at least a moment when you were 16 years old and had a crush and wrote love poetry to your crush. And, I don't know anyone who hasn't had that. Right. And if you haven't, come talk to me. We'll figure out why, but you see this, because it's part of life. And what the Bible's trying to do is capture each of the moods of life. I think that's the answer to that question. David, you're up.
I think you just said it, but I'll say it again.
Please. That's fine with me. I'm sure you'll say it better.
I mean, the thing is that it strikes me, and it struck me very recently, in fact, because I meditate, is that all these questions, yes, they're all questions that we ask. Absolutely. I agree with that. And there is no answer except to live now, to live today. I think that it's leading me That's why I said when you did Kohelet, I've studied Kohelet with you a number of times, and it's the first time it really, really meant something to me. And I said, oh, or Job, it's the first time really that meant something to me. It's because what have I got? So let me stop. I've been around a lot of people who tried to be immortal. The business I was in, and it didn't work. And the only thing you got is this moment right now, which if I surrender to that, if I stop trying to find something other than that, I cultivate these moments, which you've talked about many times, and I savor them, and I find them delicious. And I don't find every moment delicious. I'm human, so I do the best I can, and it's good. And tough. That's all I have to say.
Okay, Andy. Can't hear you.
Sorry about that.
That's better.
What I view why this is in the Bible and why we have this available to us is that the Bible is not an instruction manual. It's not if put part A and part B and put something together to assemble things. It's to teach us, to give us discussion, to see things maybe that you might not be exposed to normally. And that's why when I read this now, like reviewing it last night and thinking about it, it just came to me. It's like, hey, in case you run into this is an idea, this is a way of life that a person could live. Is that what you want? It's more of like a question to me. Mm-hmm. And that's why I see it and why it's important to have these types of stories available to us so we can grow and continue to flourish. Because if we don't have these things in there, we don't know when these things pop up, we don't know where to go or what to do or maybe how to think about it. And that's just how I viewed it.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. Bert, go ahead.
I want to build on what both David and Andy said. When something happens to me in my life, good, bad, whatever, I often grapple with how to think about it. What the Bible is giving me, whether it's Job, whether it's Kohelet, is a starting place. I may totally disagree with what I'm initially reading, but it gives me something to think about rather than being lost in how to approach dealing with the issue du jour. Okay. So for me, it's teaching in a way, but it also gives me a starting place. Sometimes you have a problem and it's hard to know where to start dealing with it because you're so enveloped by it. It's so overwhelming. This is a place, may not be the right place, but it's a place. And having that place, I can then begin to deal with it. I have to say, Rabbi, because of that, you have made a major difference in no, it's okay. You're a good guy. I like your happy dog and your wife. Okay.
Yeah,
but seriously,
you.
You've given me places to start thinking and dealing with things in a non-hopeless way.
Okay, I'm so glad. Let's take a jump for a minute because I know we can keep going, but I know there's more to say. I want to show you, I started collecting from across the books I own some of the other answers that the Jewish tradition put forward to these questions, just to see a contrast, okay? Now let's take a look at a couple of them, just sort of quickly, because we don't have too much time, okay? So if you look at Genesis, if you go to Genesis, so this is the beginning. Genesis 2 is the second story of creation. And what's important about it is that a story of creation is not just the story of where we came from. It's also a story of what we are. So the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the earth, which is already suggestive of Kohelet, meaning that we're like nature, like the dust of the earth, we blow away. And he blew into his nostrils the breath of life, but we have this breath of God in us. And man became a living being. God planted a garden in Eden, put the man there, and he formed him from the garden. He grew up every tree. And then here's the line. The Lord God took the man and placed him in the garden. And that would have been the end of the story. That's enough. He put him in a garden. That's what you needed to know for the story. But there's two verbs that come next, two verbs in the infinitive. Lo'avda u'l'shamra. He put him in the garden, and then why? Here's the why. La'avod means to work, to cultivate something. Also means to worship, but to cultivate it. U'l'shamra means to watch it, to guard it. We were put into the world to cultivate the world, to work it, and to guard it. In this translation, to till it and tend it. That's a sense of our purpose in the world. And in a sense, that's why you were created. Now we go one more step forward, or actually two more steps forward, up to Abraham. And here we have another reflection on why we're here, right? God said to Abraham, Lord said to Abraham, go forth from your country, from your birthplace, your family, from your father's house. I'll make of you a great nation. I'll bless you and make your name great. And then there's two words in Hebrew, Heyeh bracha. Heyeh bracha is in the tzivui form. It's in the command form. This is a direct imperative. Be a blessing. So first you're told you're there in the world to cultivate the world and to guard it. Then you're told as a Jew, you're there in the world to be a blessing. You're to be a blessing. That's your job in the world. So when you ask, what's the purpose of my existence? How do I measure whether my life has any purpose? The question is, have I been a blessing to anybody? Was I a blessing to the world in some sense? Okay, now Leviticus 19. This is the covenant with the whole people. The Lord said to Moses, speak to the whole Israelite community, say to them, Kadoshim tihiyu ki kadosh ani Adonai. You will be holy. You will live a life of kedusha, of sanctity and of holiness. That's why you're in the world. Okay? Now let's take a look down. The book of Psalms begins with the word ashrei. The first word of the book of Psalms is ashrei, which means happiness. It's a whole different attitude than Kohelet. The first word of Kohelet is hevel hevalim. It's all mist. It's all futility. It's all emptiness. It's all hollow. The book of Psalms begins in a very different way. He has a different attitude, different temperament. Different temperament. He says, Ashrei ish, happy is the man. And who is this one? Happy is the man who has not followed the counsel of the wicked or taken the path of the sinner or joined the insolent. Rather, the teaching of the Lord is his delight. He studies it day and night. So to engage in God's word brings some kind of deep happiness, right? He is like a tree planted beside streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, whose foliage never dies, and whatever it produces thrives. So the answer to Kohelet in the book of Psalms is, you're reading the wrong stuff, man. You're not engaging with God. You're not engaging with the ways of God and the words of God. But I think in the biblical tradition, this is the most wonderful answer. The most wonderful answer is, in a similar way, is the Psalm 92, which again begins with the word tov. He says it's good. They all begin with a very different attitude about how you look into the world, how you look into the world. Now, when we move to the rabbinic tradition, here you have a number, but there's no tractate of the Talmud called the Tractate of Personal Meaning. But rather what we get in the Talmud is a set of reflections on what lasts, what really lasts. So I'll give you a couple of them, which I think are just classic, and then we can discuss these if you'd like. So this is Midrash Tehillim. It's a beautiful Midrash. It's a Midrash on a line of the Psalms, which is very popular if you've ever been to Hallel, right? It's Pitchu li sharei tzedek avovam odeya. Open for me the gates of righteousness, so I may enter and praise the Lord. Zeh shar ladonai. This is the gate of God. Tzadikim yavovo. The righteous can enter. So the question of the Midrash is, when would anybody ever make such a statement? Pitchu li sharei tzedek. Open for me the gates of righteousness, right? And the psalmist, the rabbi who's reading the psalm says, when a person dies and goes up to the next world. So he has this imagination that when you die, your body and soul separate, and your soul goes up to the next world. And it stands in front of judgment. So there's an angel at the gate, like Jewish St. Peter, right? And the angel asks you, they will ask, what was your occupation in the world? What was your occupation in the world? And of course, if you say I was a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant or a business person or a professor, they're going to say irrelevant. That's my dog. They will say that's irrelevant. That's not what we're looking for. How did you spend your life? And if the person answers, I fed the hungry, they will say, you who fed the hungry, you may enter. Right? This is the gateway to God, the righteous may enter. If the person says, I cared for the helpless, they'll say, you who cared for the helpless may enter. Same for the person who cared for abandoned children, for those who did charity, and those who acted in loving, kind ways. Now, the kunz about this story, this Midrash, which is great, is that the rabbis who wrote it, they don't know what happens after you die. Nobody knows what happens after you die. The Midrash really isn't about what happens when you die. The Midrash is, what can you do in the world that carries with it a sense of eternity? It's the same question Kohelet's asking. What can I do in the world that matters? What do I do in the world that really lasts? And the answer is, if you open your hand to the other, if you feed the hungry and care for the helpless and raise children and protect the world, then you're engaging in activities that have a resonance beyond your own existence. Maybe they won't remember you a generation from now. They remember very few a generation from now. But you will do things in the world that you will know are going to affect the world far beyond the boundaries of your own existence, far beyond the time of your life and the place of your life. And that's what the Midrash is really about. And the reason why it's stated as a thing, what happens when you die, is because those are the kinds of things we think about when somebody dies. The writer David Brooks, who is a columnist in the New York Times, has been thinking a lot about this kind of stuff. And he's written a couple of books on it and many columns. And he has a really interesting reflection on this. He says there's a difference between resume values and eulogy values, right? On your resume, you put down how all the experiences you've had and your successes and your authority, right? Resume is about your net worth. Resume is about what you've earned in the world, what you've accomplished in the world. Eulogy values are the things we talk about when somebody dies, right? Something rabbis tell you all the time, that no kid ever got up at a funeral and said, I'm proud of my dad for the millions that he earned, or I'm proud of my mom for the power she wielded. We don't talk about what people have or had at a funeral. We talk about what they gave. We don't talk about what they controlled. We talk about how they cared. We have a whole different way of measuring people when we stand at the end of life than when we stand in the middle of affairs, the middle of life. A whole different way of measuring people. The people who matter, the people whose obituaries catch our eye when we read them in the newspaper, are not the richest, most powerful people. They're the people who did stuff to protect the world, to care, to give, to go beyond the boundaries of the self. And what the Midrash is saying is that every time you take a step beyond the boundaries of the self, it may be, you could say, I'm earning you're earning an immortality, but what you're doing is you feel that you're doing something beyond that. You're doing something more, right? And so one of the great comments of the rabbis, one of the great observations of the rabbis is this one that comes next. It says, these are the deeds which have immediate reward and continue to reward in the world to come. Honoring parents, doing deeds of loving kindness, attending the house of study morning and evening, providing hospitality, visiting the sick, helping the needy bride, attending the dead, probing the meaning of prayer, making peace between one person and another, and husband and wife, and the study of Torah is equivalent to them all. And so the idea is these are activities which draw us out of the self and into the social world where we can touch eternity. And that's the argument that the rabbis make. Anybody buy that one? That convince anybody? Judy, you're shaking your head. Anybody convinced by this? You know, I get a vote of confidence here for on behalf of the rabbis of the Talmud. Yeah, Stan, you want to add something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I said, it says the study of Torah is equivalent to them all, but it's only if you apply the study of Torah to your life, not just study. It takes engaging.
Well,
Our
study of
life
Torah
calls for the great
always
Torah.
brings action. Yeah, it always you have to do this. Just studying it isn't going to help you. You got to do this stuff. That's true. But you see, even study of Torah forces you, as Bert said a moment ago so beautifully, it forces you to think about things you weren't thinking about before. You're thinking about, what is the nature of the world, and what is the nature of my ethics, and what is the nature of my impact on the world, right? That's what study of Torah is about. It's about moral sensitivity and consciousness. That's where it comes from. Okay. Any other comments? We're going to do one more source before we finish. Ready? So let's just take one more source. Can we do that? And then we'll finish up Kohelet. So the locus classicus of all of this is one remarkable story in the Talmud about the most remarkable rabbi who ever lived. And the most remarkable rabbi who ever lived was Rabbi Akiva in the 2nd century. And And here is Rabbi Akiva. There he is. Okay. So the problem with Rabbi Akiva, there was a law, the Hadrianic persecution made it illegal to teach Torah. But Rabbi Akiva went on teaching Torah anyway, because he said, this is the life of the Jewish people. And if I remove the life of the Jewish people, I will destroy the people. So he gets arrested for treason, for sedition. And the Romans decide, this is the Roman persecution after the failed revolt of 120. The Romans decide they're going to make an example of him, and they're going to torture him to death in public. And this is the rabbis telling the story of the death of their master, Rabbi Akiva. So they say when Rabbi Akiva was taken out to be executed for the crime of teaching Torah in public, it happened to be the hour of the recital of the Shema. So we say Shema morning and night. You're supposed to say Shema as the sun's going down. So just as the sun's going down, they begin torturing Akiva to death in public so that the people would see and realize that you can't resist the emperor's word. As the executioners were combing his flesh with iron combs, he was lovingly making himself ready to accept upon himself the yoke of the kingdom. Meaning, as they're starting to torture him in this horrendous way to die, he's starting to get ready to say the Shema. Now, just incidentally, so this is a martyrdom story. And if you think about this in a certain way, think about 3 martyrdom stories and how they've had an effect on Western civilization. The martyrdom of Socrates, the martyrdom of Jesus of Nazareth, and the martyrdom of Rabbi Akiva. And the idea that the master, the one who holds the truth, is killed by the society which doesn't understand him and finds him a problem, which finds him sees him as a rebel. It's the problem in each of those stories. If you read the Apology and the Crito, and you read Plato, you know that the death of Socrates is a serious problem. It's really where the book The Republic begins, because Plato's trying to figure out what kind of society would I have to build that wouldn't put a guy like Socrates to death. And the Christian story begins in the same way. God's son is in the world, or rather the Messiah is in the world, and he gets killed. What's going on? How do you understand that? Right? And here we have Rabbi Akiva's story. Here's Rabbi Akiva's story. And here's how the rabbis make sense of it, right? So he's getting ready to say the Shema. And his students, in the imagination of the rabbis, this is all imaginary. His students are sitting in the first row, and they ask him, Rebbe, Ad Kan, even now? So, I mean, the crazy idea is that the teacher is being tortured to death, but he doesn't stop teaching. Even in the midst of dying, he's teaching. Because in a certain way, that's the whole point of the story, that his dying is an act of teaching. So the students ask him, Rebbe, Rabbeinu, Ad Kan, even now? Right? And he replied, so even as he's being tortured to death, he comes up with this great literary answer. All my days I've been troubled by the verse, Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, you will love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might, which I've interpreted to me, even if he takes your soul. But I said, when will I ever have a chance to do this? And now I have a chance to do this. God is taking my life. I'm going to say the Shema. So he says the Shema, Adonai, and he prolonged the last word, Echad, which is a very nice custom. You'll hear in many synagogues. Adonai Echad. And as he finished it, he dies. That's where the custom, by the way, this is a very strong custom that you recite the Shema with a dying person. That's where it comes from. A divine voice. Now, here's the problem. The Rebbe, the greatest holder of rabbinic truth, of Jewish religious truth, has just died at the hands of the most brutal empire we ever lived under. How did God let that happen? Why did God let that happen? Right? Where is the meaning in life? Where is the meaning in Torah? Where is the meaning in a universe if God would let such a thing happen? So then now the Talmud has to come up with an answer. And because they're so panicked, it's such a difficult question, you're going to get a bunch of answers. I think there's 4 of them here, 5 of them. Ready? Number 1, a divine voice went forth and proclaimed, happy are you, Akiba, that your soul departed with the word Echad. Right? It was a glorious death because he died with the words of Shema on his lips. Okay, if that were the answer, that would be the end of the story. But obviously that answer doesn't satisfy us. So now we have a second answer. The ministering angel spoke out to the Holy One. So in heaven, while Akiba's dying on earth, and we're looking at this with astonishment, in heaven, there's an argument. This is a classic rabbinic move in a storytelling that they can't put into their own mouths heretical words, but they can put heretical words into the mouth of the angels, right? So the angels ask God, in Hebrew, it's a poem, Zo Torah v'zo schara. This is the guy's Torah, and this is his reward. This man lives a life of such righteousness, and this is what you let happen to him? What the hell's wrong with you? They yell at God. What the hell is wrong with you? What kind of universe have you created, right? He should have been one that died by thine hand, God. He should have had a quiet death, surrounded by great-great-grandchildren. God replied, their portion is in life. Don't complain to me. Whatever joys, this is the Kohelet answer, right? Whatever joys you're going to find, you find in life. It doesn't come in death. So, but they're not satisfied with that answer either. So here's the third answer. The third answer is just then another divine voice that tells you that they weren't satisfied with the previous 3 answers. Happy are you, Akiba, destined is you for the world and for life in the world to come. All right, so the third answer is he's going to go to heaven. They don't like that either. So here's a fourth answer. Fourth answer is on the day Rabbi Akiba died, Rabbi Yehuda was born. Which means what? Which means the man dies, but his Torah doesn't die. The man dies, but the truth that he taught, the truth that he fought for, the truth that was at the heart of his being, the truth goes on living. And the next generation of the promulgators of that truth, of the teachers of that truth, come into the world with his death. There are 4 answers because the Talmud can't figure out the answer to the question. How do you find meaning in a world which is as difficult as Kohelet found it to be? Okay, Douglas, you're up.
In the Talmud, in the story of Akiba's Academy,
Yeah.
where Moses is sitting there,
Yeah.
and he asks God to show him his fate, and God shows him his fate. Moses asks the same question, and the response God gives is basically, "Shut up, you."
Yes.
Am I missing that?
Same words. Same words. Zo Torah v'zo schara. Right.
And the answer is not. They don't get any satisfactory answer. You just get
No.
shut up, you.
We all do. Right. Precisely. Right. There's no answer. So we'll have to come back to this because there's no answer. You're right. But I want you to see that but the Talmud comes up with these different answers because it's trying to hold the conviction that life isn't just what happens to us here in the world. That life is really about more than that. There are things that we can invest ourselves in that give us a sense of eternity, that give us an eternity. For Akiba's eternity is in his Torah, in the truth that he taught, and the truth that he lived for, and the truth that was so important to him. That's how he lives. Yes, Andy, yeah.
I just when the responses that came out, what's the timeline from that? Were they like all around the same time, or was it like over time new answers had to come up?
What do you mean? The time limit of these 4 different answers?
Correct.
Yeah, no, they come over the course of 2 generations, the generations of the Mishnah, right?
So that means that over time, I guess they were an answer was accepted for a while, and then they needed to come up with another one. It's not like they came up with these 4 because it like instantaneously, yeah, this doesn't apply. Let's do it. Let's get another one.
I don't know. It looks to me like it came over the course of a couple of generations. But I don't think they were instantaneous. I think this is an ongoing discussion. At least that's the way it presents itself. This is an ongoing discussion of what's the meaning of life. Okay, and we keep coming up with different answers as we go through it. All right, folks, let's stop here. It's been great learning. I'm sorry for those who have to watch this later because we didn't get on live stream. We'll try it again. We're going to meet in 2 weeks, right? So let me wish you a happy Thanksgiving, a great Hanukkah, and first week in December, we do this again. And we're going to open Shira Shirim for a cold winter morning. We're going to open a warm Mediterranean, sexy, sensual love poem. So everybody wear something Mediterranean and warm, okay? We'll see you
Thank
next
you.
time. Everybody stay well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.